At a family dinner that was supposed to be warm and loving, I noticed my daughter-in-law's subtle move. She thought I wasn't paying attention as she slipped something into my wine glass. But what she didn't know is that I saw everything. Instead of confronting her immediately, I decided to play along and swap the glasses. What followed next shocked everyone at the table and revealed a side of her that no one expected. Watch until the end, because the twist will leave you speechless. I always believed family dinners were sacred, moments where love, laughter, and stories were shared across the table. Ever since my wife passed away, I tried to keep the tradition alive with my son and his wife, Emily. She was the daughter-in-law I once welcomed into my home with open arms. At first, she seemed perfect, polite, charming, and endlessly attentive. But over time, I began to notice the cracks. Emily's smiles no longer reached her eyes. Her questions about my finances grew more frequent, more pointed. She hovered a little too closely when I discussed the will with my lawyer. And most of all, she had a way of looking at me as though she were calculating, measuring my days, silently counting down to a future where she and my son would inherit everything I worked so hard for. Still, I kept quiet. I wanted peace for my son's sake. Family harmony, I told myself, was worth enduring a little unease. But then that evening came. The dinner table was set beautifully, crystal glasses sparkling, roasted chicken filling the air with warmth. My son laughed about work stories, his voice echoing through the dining room. I pretended to be at ease, but inside something gnawed at me. And then it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Emily lean ever so slightly forward. Her hand brushed against my glass as if adjusting it, a subtle practiced motion. She looked up at me quickly, flashing that sweet, innocent smile she always wore when caught. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but I did. I had spent years running a business where details mattered, where one missed sign could ruin everything. My instincts screamed at me. Something was in that glass. I froze for a second, trying not to reveal what I'd seen. My heart pounded, my palms damp with sweat. My son kept talking, oblivious. "And Emily?" She leaned back in her chair, calm as ever, sipping her own wine as if nothing had happened. But I knew she thought I didn't see. She thought the old man sitting at the head of the table was too blind, too tired, too trusting. She couldn't have been more wrong. That night, as I sat at the table pretending to be engaged in my son's story about his promotion at work, my mind drifted backward through all the little signs I had ignored for months, signs that now screamed at me in unison. Emily had been slipping lately. Small mistakes she didn't think I'd notice. The way she always insisted on pouring my drink for me, hovering with that practiced smile. The time she suggested I try a new herbal tea she brought over, swearing it would help me sleep better. Or the way she once frowned, just for a second, when my doctor mentioned that my health was improving. I told myself not to be paranoid. After all, what kind of man suspects his own daughter-in-law of? What exactly? Malice, betrayal, worse, but the unease never left. Every look, every suggestion, every innocent touch around my meals. It all began to feel calculated. And then there was the inheritance. My wife and I had worked for decades to build something solid for our family. We weren't wealthy in the way people imagine, but we were comfortable. The house, the savings, the land. It was enough to give my son and his family security for the rest of their lives. But when my wife passed, something in Emily's eyes shifted. I saw it during the will discussion with the lawyer. My son wept quietly, holding my hand, but Emily, she listened. Not with grief, with interest. She asked questions about timelines, about signatures, about when things would be finalized. At first, I told myself she was just being practical. But over time, I realized she wasn't thinking of family legacy. She was thinking of herself, and that was when her behavior began to change. She started visiting more often, bringing meals, offering to help with small tasks. To my son, it looked like devotion. To me, it looked like surveillance. She was always watching me, what I ate, what I drank, how often I took my medication. She encouraged me to rest more, subtly making me feel older, weaker than I really was. But the thing is, I wasn't weak. My body might have been slowing, but my mind was sharp. I remembered every comment, every shift in her tone, every flicker of irritation when I didn't finish a meal she prepared. And so, when I saw her hand hovering near my wine glass that evening, I wasn't surprised. It felt inevitable, like the climax of a play I'd been watching for months. My son remained blissfully unaware, recounting some story about his co-workers. His laughter rang through the room, comforting yet painful, because he had no idea the woman he trusted most was the very person I now feared. I kept my face neutral, lifting the fork to my lips as though nothing had happened. But inside a storm raged. The question that haunted me was simple. What exactly had she put in my glass? Poison? A drug? Something to make me sick, weak enough to land in a hospital where the grieving family could play their part? I didn't know. But one thing was certain. I wasn't about to find out by drinking it. Emily glanced at me then, her smile fixed in place. Our eyes met for a second, and in that moment I felt it. The quiet, hidden truth. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't carelessness. This was intent. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I realized the biggest danger I faced wasn't old age or illness. It was sitting right across the table from me, hiding behind polite words and a beautiful face. I stared at that glass like it held the weight of my future. The ruby-red liquid shimmered under the dining room light, its surface smooth and inviting. But all I could see was the subtle movement of Emily's hand, just moments before. For the rest of the meal, I played the part of the unsuspecting father-in-law. I laughed when my son cracked a joke, nodded when Emily asked about my garden, and even complimented the seasoning on the chicken. All the while my mind churned. I needed to be careful. If she suspected I had seen her, things could spiral out of control. She was cunning, too polished to reveal her true intentions openly. That much I had learned. I excused myself halfway through dinner, feigning a trip to the bathroom. In the mirror, I studied my reflection. My face looked tired, yes, but not defeated. My eyes still held clarity, my mind sharp. I whispered to myself, don't let her win. Don't give her the satisfaction. When I returned, Emily's eyes flicked toward my untouched glass just for a second. That tiny movement told me everything. She was waiting, anticipating. I forced a smile and sat back down. My son, oblivious, continued telling his stories, pouring himself another drink. That's when the thought hit me. If Emily was so sure I wouldn't notice, maybe I could turn her arrogance against her. Maybe this wasn't the time to confront her, but to let her trap herself. So I leaned casually, almost carelessly, and slid the wine glass closer to me. Emily's face brightened for a moment, just barely, but I caught it, that flicker of satisfaction. She thought she had won, but she didn't see what I saw. The faint tremor in her hand as she adjusted her napkin, the way her breathing slowed as though bracing for something. I let the moment stretch, then picked up the glass. My heart hammered against my ribs. I raised it to my lips, then paused. My son glanced at me but said nothing. Emily's eyes fixed on me with an intensity I had never felt before. And then at the last second I set it down again. Maybe I'll save this for later, I said lightly, forcing a chuckle. Wine always makes me sleepy too early. Emily's smile froze. Her lips curved upward, but her eyes gave her away. For just a heartbeat there was irritation there, sharp, fleeting, but unmistakable. I knew I couldn't keep dodging forever. Eventually she'd find another way, another opportunity. But tonight, I had seen the truth with my own eyes. Tonight the game had changed. The question now was no longer if Emily wanted me gone. It was how far she was willing to go to make it happen, and whether I was strong enough, clever enough to stop her before it was too late. Dinner dragged on, each second heavier than the last. My son, bless him, carried the conversation effortlessly. Stories from the office, a new project he was excited about, even a joke about how I still beat him at chess despite my old man reflexes. He laughed freely, blind to the storm brewing beneath the calm surface of our home. But Emily wasn't laughing. Not really. She smiled when he did, laughed at the right beats, but her attention kept slipping back to me. Her eyes flicked to my glass again and again, as if trying to will me into drinking it. I let her watch. I even lifted the glass once, swirled it casually as though savoring the aroma, then set it back down untouched. Each time I caught the faintest twitch of disappointment cross her face. Inside, my mind was already racing ahead. If she was bold enough to try this tonight, she wouldn't stop. And I couldn't simply call her out without proof, not when my son's happiness hung in the balance. He loved her. To him, Emily was the perfect partner, the devoted wife. If I accused her outright, I'd risk shattering his world without evidence to back it up. So I made a decision that would change everything. If Emily wanted to play games, then I would too. But I would play them better. After dessert was served, an apple pie she had baked herself, I excused myself again, saying I needed to rest. I carried my glass with me, smiling at Emily as I did. Her eyes followed it, sharp and calculating. In my study, I poured the wine carefully into a small container I kept for paint thinner. My hands trembled slightly as I sealed it and slid it into my desk drawer. Evidence. Proof. When I returned to the table, my glass was empty, the rim faintly stained, as though I had finally finished it in my room. Emily's smile widened when she saw, "Feeling better?" she asked sweetly. "Oh yes," I replied, matching her tone. "A good glass of wine always helps me sleep." She believed me. For the first time, I saw the shadow of victory in her expression, the satisfaction of a plan working exactly as she had hoped. But what she didn't know, what she could never suspect, was that I had already turned the tables. Later that night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, sleep refusing to come. My son's soft snoring drifted down the hallway, but my mind replayed the evening in sharp detail. Emily's movements, her looks, her satisfaction at what she thought was my compliance. She wanted me gone. That much was now undeniable, but the bigger question burned inside me like fire. Why? Was it only the inheritance? Was it the house, the land, the security my savings could provide? Or was there something darker, deeper, something I hadn't yet seen? Whatever her reasons, I knew one thing. I wasn't the helpless old man she believed me to be. And soon, very soon, she would learn that the hunter had just become the hunted. The night after that dinner, I sat in my study long after everyone else had gone to bed. The small container of wine sat locked in my desk drawer, its dark liquid carrying more weight than gold. If my instincts were right, that glass didn't just hold wine, it held intent, but instinct wasn't enough. I needed proof, real proof, something undeniable, something that no one, not even Emily with her sweet smile and sharp lies, could twist into an innocent mistake. The next morning I called my old friend Martin. He wasn't just a friend, he was a retired chemist who had once worked in food safety. I told him I had a concern about something I drank the night before. He didn't ask questions. Martin always knew when not to push, but he agreed to run a quiet test for me. When I handed him the small vial that evening, his eyebrows rose, but he said nothing except, "I'll let you know in a few days." A few days. To anyone else, that might have sounded short. To me, it felt like an eternity. In those days, I became hyper-aware of everything Emily did. The way she hovered near the kitchen, how she insisted on being the one to serve my meals, the sudden interest in helping me with my medication, always checking if I had taken it, sometimes even offering to hand me the pills and a glass of water herself. I played along, never once letting her see my suspicion. I thanked her, I smiled. I let her believe I was the fool she thought I was. But every night I wrote in a small leather journal I kept hidden beneath my mattress. Each entry detailed what I saw, what I suspected, what she said. I wrote down times, dates, exact words. I wasn't just a target anymore. I was building a case. One night my son walked in unexpectedly while Emily was fussing with my evening tea. He kissed her on the cheek, laughing about some silly thing at work. But I saw it, the way she stiffened, the way her hand froze just long enough before she stirred the cup again. I wondered then, did my son notice? Did he see even a fraction of what I saw? Or was his love for her blinding him completely? The hardest part wasn't the fear, it was the silence. Pretending not to know, pretending to be the harmless old man who could be fooled so easily. Some nights I wanted to scream the truth at my son, shake him, tell him what his wife was capable of. But I couldn't, not yet, not until I had the evidence. And so I waited. I endured. I let Emily play her game, never once revealing that I had already moved my first piece on the board. Because if she thought she was the predator, she was about to learn she had grossly underestimated the man she was hunting. The waiting was unbearable. Each morning I woke up wondering if today would be the day Martin called with the results. Each evening I went to bed with my mind running in circles, rehearsing what I would do if the worst was confirmed. Meanwhile, Emily became bolder. She began bringing me meals without being asked, a kindness that looked genuine to my son, but reeked of calculation to me. She hovered at my side when I ate, always asking, "Do you like it?" How does it taste?" Her eyes searched mine with an intensity that betrayed her sweet tone. I noticed she stopped serving my son from the same dishes she served me. He would help himself from the main pot or take a slice from the roast, while she insisted on plating my food personally. At first it seemed subtle, but soon it was undeniable. She wanted to control everything that entered my body. One afternoon, as I was resting in the living room, I overheard Emily on the phone. She was speaking quietly, almost whispering, but I caught fragments, words like documents, transfer, and finalized. When she realized I was nearby, she ended the call abruptly, her smile snapping back into place like a mask. "Just a friend from work," she said lightly. But her voice was too tight, her laugh too forced. I nodded, playing the fool once again. But inside, I wrote down every word I remembered in my journal. 3 days later, the phone finally rang. Martin's voice was low, cautious. "You were right to be suspicious," he said. "There was a sedative in that wine. Not a lethal dose, but strong enough to disorient you. If you'd had enough, especially with your heart condition—" He paused, letting the implication hang. I thanked him, my hand trembling as I set the receiver down. Proof. Cold, undeniable proof. But instead of relief, I felt a chill run down my spine. She hadn't tried to kill me outright, not yet. She wanted me weak, confused, maybe even hospitalized. That way the narrative would be simple. The old man's health finally gave out. She could hover as the grieving, dutiful daughter-in-law, while quietly ensuring I never recovered. That realization hardened something in me. Fear turned into anger. Anger turned into resolve. That evening I accepted the tea Emily offered me. I let her watch as I lifted the cup, even took a small sip before setting it aside with a sigh. "Too hot," I said. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. She knew I was resisting, but she couldn't prove it, and I couldn't confront her, not yet. Because if I did, she would simply deny it and my son would defend her. No, I needed to let her believe she still held the upper hand. I needed her to keep making mistakes, keep leaving traces. So I played along, night after night, pretending to stumble when I stood, pretending to forget where I left my glasses, pretending to nap while she whispered on the phone, and all the while I recorded it, every move, every word, every slip of her carefully crafted mask, because soon, very soon, I would be ready to strike back. The proof from Martin changed everything. Now I wasn't just suspicious, I was certain, but knowing the truth and acting on it were two very different things. For days I carried that knowledge in silence, watching Emily more closely than ever. Every time she smiled at my son, every time she refilled my plate or asked about my health, I saw her for what she truly was, a predator in disguise. But I also noticed something else. She was getting impatient. The little slips in her mask became more frequent. She snapped at my son over trivial things, then quickly smoothed her tone when she realized I was in the room. She pushed harder, pressing me to let her manage my medication schedule. "It's easier if I handle it," she insisted one morning, her voice sweet, but her grip on the pill bottle just a little too tight. I refused with a smile. "Joking, old habits die hard," she laughed. But the way her jaw clenched told me she didn't find it funny. I began to wonder if she sensed my resistance. Maybe she thought I was too stubborn to give in, or maybe she suspected I knew more than I let on. Either way, her actions grew bolder. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, I noticed 2 glasses of wine set neatly at my place. "Her special night," she said cheerfully. "I thought we'd both enjoy a toast." I watched her carefully. She poured her glass from the same bottle, but when it came to mine, she used a smaller decanter she had brought from the kitchen. My son didn't notice. He was busy scrolling on his phone, but I did. Every detail burned into my memory. So I smiled, lifted my glass, and raised it high. "To family," I said. Emily's eyes lit up. She touched her glass to mine with a gentle clink, watching closely as I brought it to my lips. I tilted the glass, letting the wine touch my mouth but didn't swallow. Then in a single smooth motion, I lowered it and set it back down. "Strong flavor," I commented. Her shoulders relaxed, but inside I was burning. I excused myself soon after, and poured the wine into another hidden vial in my study. Another piece of evidence, another step closer. That night I lay awake thinking about my son. How could I protect him from the truth? If I confronted Emily and exposed her, He would be torn apart. But if I stayed silent, she might succeed, and then he would lose me forever, never knowing why. The decision weighed heavily, but the answer was becoming clearer. I couldn't wait for her to make her final move. I had to set my own trap. The more Emily tried to mask her intentions, the clearer they became. She was waiting for the perfect opportunity, a night when I would be tired, distracted, vulnerable. But what she didn't know was that I was already one step ahead. I started planning every detail. If she thought she could play with my life, I would make sure her game ended in checkmate. The first step was subtle. I spoke more often about my will and inheritance, dropping hints that I was making adjustments. Her eyes always lit up at the mention of it, but I pretended not to notice. Each time I carefully measured her reactions. One afternoon I staged a phone call in the living room while she hovered nearby. "Yes, I'll be finalizing the new documents next week," I said loudly into the receiver. "I want to make sure everything is fair and safe." Emily's hand froze on the doorknob. I didn't look at her directly, but I could feel her mind racing, calculating. Safe for whom? She must have wondered. Later that evening she cooked dinner, steak, my favorite, but this time I caught the faintest hesitation before she set the plate in front of me. My son was already halfway through his meal, oblivious, chatting about work. Emily leaned forward, watching me cut into the meat. I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. "Smells amazing," I said. "But you know, my doctor recommended I cut down on heavy meals at night." Her smile faltered. "Oh, just a small bite." "You deserve it." The way she insisted confirmed everything. That night I finalized my plan. In my study, I laid out the evidence, the wine vials, the handwriting comparison, and a small audio recorder I had begun using secretly during dinners. Piece by piece, her web was unraveling. The final stage was simple. Let her believe she had succeeded, but under controlled circumstances. A trap she couldn't wriggle out of. I called Martin, my old friend, and explained what was happening. His silence on the other end lasted only a moment before he said firmly, "We'll be ready." As I hung up the phone, I glanced toward the darkened hallway. Emily was there, just barely visible, pretending to fetch a glass of water. She thought I hadn't noticed. But I had, and for the first time I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold determination, because the next move would be mine. The night of the family gathering arrived. Emily had been unusually cheerful all day, humming softly while setting the table, her movements a little too careful, a little too rehearsed. She poured the wine with the grace of someone who had been waiting for this moment, her eyes glimmering each time the glass neared my place setting. I sat silently, observing every detail, the way her fingers lingered near my glass, the faintest flicker of anticipation on her face. My son chatted idly, oblivious, praising Emily's effort in preparing the dinner. But I knew what waited in that glass. As the meal began, Emily lifted her own glass and toasted, "To family, to new beginnings, and to the future we are all building together." Her words rang hollow in my ears. I raised my glass slowly, but just as it reached my lips, I coughed, pretending to clear my throat. With a subtle sleight of hand I had practiced for days, I swapped my glass with hers, smooth, natural, unnoticed. She didn't flinch. She didn't notice. I watched as she took a sip, her lips touching the very trap she had prepared for me. A cold wave of justice ran through me, but I kept my expression neutral. Moments later, Martin, my old friend, entered the room as planned. He had agreed to come under the pretense of delivering documents for my estate. But his real purpose was much more important. He was there as a witness. Emily stiffened when she saw him, her hand tightening on her glass. "Oh, I didn't know we were expecting company," she said lightly. Though her voice trembled ever so slightly, I smiled calmly. "Martin has been helping me with a few matters. I thought tonight would be a good time to finalize some things, with everyone present." The air grew heavy. My son looked between us, confused. Emily shifted in her seat, trying to hide her unease. That's when Martin spoke. "I'll also need a few signatures tonight. It's best we discuss everything openly." Emily's face drained of color. She didn't know what Martin truly carried with him, a folder filled with every shred of evidence I had collected. And in that moment, as the ticking of the clock filled the silence, I realized this was it. The confrontation I had been waiting for. The predator thought she had me trapped, But she was about to learn the truth. Emily's hand trembled as she placed her glass back on the table, but she forced a smile. "Well, I suppose it's good to keep everything transparent," she said, her tone falsely sweet. Martin sat across from her, deliberately setting down the thick folder of documents. The sound echoed in the dining room like a gavel hitting wood. My son shifted uncomfortably, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Dad, what's all this about?" I leaned back in my chair, steadying myself. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about opening his eyes. "Son," I began slowly, "there are things I've noticed lately. Strange withdrawals. Missing valuables. Conversations that didn't quite add up." My eyes flicked toward Emily, who tried to look shocked. "At first I thought I was mistaken, but then I saw the powder in my glass tonight." The room froze. My son's fork clattered to his plate. Emily's eyes widened, her face paling. What, powder? That's absurd," she stammered, forcing a laugh. "Are you really accusing me of trying to hurt you?" "That's ridiculous." Martin slid a photo across the table. It showed Emily at a bank, withdrawing a large sum of money using my forged signature. Another document showed secret accounts under her maiden name. My son picked it up with trembling hands. "Emily, what is this?" Her mask cracked. Just for a second. Her eyes flashed with panic before she tried to regain composure. It's not what it looks like. I was just managing finances for us." "For the family!" Martin interrupted firmly. "Except the accounts are in her name alone, with no record of joint ownership. Can't hear." He flipped another page, revealing text messages between Emily and an unknown number. The words were chilling. "Once it's done, everything will be ours." My son's face turned ashen. He looked at me, then back at Emily. "Done? Emily, Tim, what did you plan?" Her composure shattered. She slammed her hands on the table, eyes wild. "You think you're so clever, old man?" "Always controlling everything, always watching me." "Well, maybe I wanted my freedom. Maybe I wanted what was owed to me." Her voice cracked with rage, and for the first time the sweet daughter-in-law facade vanished completely. I stayed calm, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "And instead of earning it, you thought you'd steal it. Or worse, and me to get it sooner." The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. My son pushed back his chair, his face torn between disbelief and fury. "Emily, tell me it isn't true," but she didn't answer. She couldn't. The poison she had meant for me was now slowly settling in her own veins. Her lips trembled and sweat beaded on her forehead. She clutched her stomach, realizing too late that she had sealed her own fate. And I sat there watching the trap close in on her, knowing the moment of truth had finally arrived. Emily's hand shook violently as she tried to steady her glass, but it slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor. Red wine spread across the polished wood like blood, and everyone's eyes darted to her trembling form. She clutched her stomach, breathing heavily. "And for this isn't happening," she whispered, her voice breaking. My son rushed to her side, panic in his eyes. "Emily, what's wrong?" He looked at me, desperate. "Dad, call someone." "Get help!" I didn't move. My voice was steady, almost chilling in its calmness. "There's no need, son. What you're seeing is the result of her own plan." His face twisted in confusion and horror. "What are you talking about?" I looked directly at Emily, my gaze piercing through the last of her lies. "She poisoned the wine, son, my wine." But I switched glasses before she could realize. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Emily gasped, eyes wide with terror. "No, he's lying. He's trying to twist everything." Her words broke off into a cough, her body shaking violently. Martin spoke up then, his voice like a hammer. "Your father isn't lying. I've seen the reports, the accounts, the messages, and now the evidence is right in front of you." Emily's facade completely crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes, not of guilt, but of sheer panic at being caught. She turned to my son, reaching for him with trembling hands. "Please, you have to believe me. I did it for us, for you." Everything I did, it was for our future. But my son stepped back, shaking his head in disbelief. His eyes filled with pain, betrayal, and a kind of heartbreak I had prayed he would never feel. "No, Emily, you did this for yourself. You wanted money, power, and you were willing to destroy my family to get it." Her breathing quickened. ragged and shallow. She collapsed to her knees, clutching the tablecloth for support. "Please, to help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. For a long, tense moment, the room was silent except for her labored breaths. My son stood frozen, torn between his instinct to help and the crushing weight of betrayal. I finally spoke, my tone solemn but unwavering. This was her choice. Every lie, every theft, every plan, she set this in motion. And now she faces the consequences. Emily's eyes met mine, filled with hatred even in her weakness. She tried to speak, to spit out one last venomous remark, but her strength was fading. My son, trembling, finally whispered, "Dad, what do we do?" I placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "We let the truth be seen, son, and then we move forward without her lies dragging us down." As Emily crumpled to the floor, her once perfect facade shattered forever, I realized the moment I had feared and prepared for had come to pass. She had undone herself with her own hands, and for the first time in months the house felt free. Emily lay sprawled on the floor, her breath shallow, her once pristine dress stained with spilt wine. The elegant woman who had walked into my home with her head held high now looked small. Broken and defeated, my son stood frozen, his hands shaking as though he couldn't decide whether to reach out to her or recoil from the venom that still lingered in her words. He whispered, almost to himself, "How could I not have seen it all this time?" Emily's eyes flicked toward him, desperate, her voice hoarse but cutting. "Because you're weak. Just like your father, always so trusting, always so blind. I was the only one strong enough to take what we deserved." Her venomous words, even in her final moments, twisted like knives in the room. My son flinched as if struck, tears brimming in his eyes. "Deserved? You call betrayal, theft, and murder deserving?" I knelt slowly beside him, resting a hand on his trembling shoulder. "Son, sometimes the people closest to us wear the best masks. It doesn't mean you failed. It means she was good at hiding what she really was." Emily let out a bitter laugh, though it quickly broke into a coughing fit. Don't act like you've won. Even if I fall, you'll never escape what I've planted. The lies, the seeds, they'll grow long after I'm gone." I leaned in closer, my voice low, steady and final. "No, Emily. Tonight the truth uprooted everything you tried to bury, and that is something even you cannot poison." Her eyes flickered with rage, then despair. She slumped forward, her strength gone, the fight finally drained from her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Martin cleared his throat, his voice breaking the heavy stillness. "Everything here will be documented. The authorities will handle the rest. You and your son will not have to carry this shadow any longer." My son collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. His world had shattered, but within the ruin there was also a strange sense of release. The truth, no matter how ugly, was finally exposed. I stood tall, my heart heavy yet strangely relieved. For months I had felt the creeping dread of Emily's schemes, the constant suspicion, the gnawing fear that my end would come not from age, but from betrayal. And now, here it was laid bare before us all. I looked at my son, who slowly raised his tear-streaked face to meet mine. "I'm sorry, Dad, I should have believed you sooner. I should have protected you." I squeezed his shoulder firmly. "No, son, you did what you thought was right. That's all any of us can do. What matters now is that we know the truth, and we can move forward without lies between us." Emily's lifeless form was a grim reminder of how far greed and deception could drag a person. But to me, she was no longer a threat. She was simply gone. For the first time in a long time, I exhaled fully. The house felt lighter. The chains of fear and manipulation had been broken, and though the night had ended in tragedy, I knew it had also brought something far greater, the chance to reclaim peace, trust, and the future that Emily had tried so desperately to steal. The silence after Emily's collapse was heavier than any storm. For a long time, none of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock, counting each second as though daring us to acknowledge what had just happened. My son sat slumped in his chair, his face pale, his hands trembling. The weight of betrayal was etched into his every movement. "Dad," he finally whispered, his voice raw, How did I miss this? How did I not see what she was doing right under my nose?" I pulled out the chair beside him and sat down slowly, my body weary from the ordeal but my mind sharper than ever. "Because, son," I said gently, "you loved her, and love blinds us to the darkness in others. You wanted to believe in her goodness, even when the signs were there. He clenched his fists, tears streaming down his cheeks. But I was supposed to protect you. Instead, I let her into our home, into our family. And she nearly destroyed everything. I placed a steady hand on his shoulder. No, she destroyed herself. Her greed, her lies, her own choices, those were her weapons. You were a victim of her mask, just like me. Don't carry her sins as your own. For the first time, he looked at me. Truly looked at me. Not as the father he once thought, too stubborn, too cautious, but as the man who had seen the truth when no one else could. His voice cracked. You saved us. If you hadn't noticed, if you hadn't acted. I nodded quietly. We'd both be gone. But we're not, and that's what matters. Martin, who had remained silent for much of the chaos, finally spoke. I'll take care of the evidence. The authorities will handle the rest. What's important now is that both of you focus on healing. Healing. The word echoed in my mind. For months I had lived under the shadow of suspicion, fear, and silence. Tonight that shadow had finally lifted, but in its place was grief. Grief not just for what Emily had done, but for what she could have been if she had chosen differently. As the night wore on, we sat together, not as father and son divided by doubt, but as family reunited by truth. For the first time in so long, there was no hidden agenda, no unspoken fear, only honesty. Later, when Emily's body was taken away and the house grew quiet again, I walked through each room slowly. Every corner seemed to hold a memory of her false kindness. The flowers she had arranged in the living room, the carefully stacked cookbooks in the kitchen, the way she used to fuss over details to appear perfect. It was all a lie, but as I stood there, I realized something powerful. Her lies had no more power here. This house once filled with her shadow was mine again, ours again. That night I slept for the first time without fear of what tomorrow might bring. And when I woke, it was to a sunrise that felt like a promise, the beginning of a new chapter free from deceit. The next few days unfolded like a blur. The authorities came swiftly. Once Martin handed over the evidence, bank statements, text messages, and witness testimony that painted the entire picture with painful clarity. Detectives sat across from me at the dining table, their pens scratching across notepads as they asked questions I never thought I'd have to answer. When did you first suspect her? What exactly did you see in the wine glass? How long had you been aware of her secret accounts? Each answer felt like reopening a wound, but for once I didn't feel powerless. Every word I spoke was another nail sealing, shut the coffin of Emily's deception. My son sat beside me during the questioning, his face pale but determined. He answered when asked, his voice shaky yet honest. I could see the pain in his eyes every time Emily's name was mentioned, but I could also see the strength building in him, the realization that he had survived her lies. When the officers finally left, promising to close the case quickly, the neighborhood had already started buzzing with whispers. Neighbors who once praised Emily's charm now muttered about the poison, the bank accounts, the betrayal. People looked at me with a strange mix of sympathy and admiration, as though I had survived a storm they couldn't imagine. But admiration didn't heal wounds. What did, however, was the quiet strength of community. Mrs. Thompson from next door stopped by with a casserole, her eyes wide with shock as she murmured, I never would have believed it if I hadn't heard it from the police myself. She fooled us all. Others came too, not just out of curiosity, but out of genuine care. Friends, neighbors, even my church community, all of them offered support. They reminded me that despite the horror, I wasn't alone. My son, however, struggled more deeply. Nights found him sitting on the porch, staring into the darkness as if searching for answers in the stars. Dad, he confessed one evening, his voice low, I don't know how to live with this. I loved her. I trusted her, and now it feels like everything was a lie. I sat beside him, the cool night air heavy around us. Son, I said softly, the fact that she lied doesn't erase the truth of your love. You gave her your heart, honestly. That was your strength, not your weakness. Her betrayal says more about her than it ever will about you. He looked at me, eyes glistening. But I let her hurt you. I placed a firm hand on his shoulder. No, she tried to hurt me. But in the end, she destroyed herself. And we're still here. The weight in his gaze lifted slightly. Slowly, I saw a flicker of something return to him. Not joy, not yet, but the faint light of resilience. The wider community's reaction also carried unexpected consequences. Some were scandalized, whispering judgment about how we hadn't noticed sooner. But others reached out in solidarity, sharing their own stories of betrayal, deception, and survival. I realized then that we weren't the only ones who had been scarred by someone wearing a mask of kindness. Emily's downfall, tragic as it was, became a warning, a story that rippled through the community, teaching others to trust their instincts, to question what doesn't feel right. And as the days turned into weeks, I began to understand that what she had meant for destruction had, in a strange way, created something stronger: unity, between me and my son, within our family, and even within our neighborhood. The poison she poured into my glass never reached me, but the truth I poured out in its place, that would last far longer than her lies ever could. Weeks passed, and with each sunrise, the heavy shadow Emily left behind began to fade, though it never vanished completely. Healing wasn't immediate. It came in fragile fragments, in quiet moments when the house no longer felt suffocating, in small conversations where trust began to rebuild between me and my son. At first, the silence was the hardest part. The house had always echoed with her voice, her carefully crafted sweetness, her laughter that now seemed hollow in memory. Without her, the halls felt empty. But slowly I realized that emptiness wasn't a curse, it was freedom. My son struggled deeply with guilt. I would often find him sitting alone, staring at photographs of him and Emily, his face tight with pain. One night, I joined him as he held a wedding photo in his hands. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I thought she was my forever. How do I move on from this, Dad? How do I trust anyone again?" I took a deep breath, my own memories of loss and betrayal weighing heavy on my chest. You don't heal by pretending it didn't happen. You heal by accepting it, by learning from it, and by remembering that not everyone wears a mask. Some people truly love. Some people truly give. Don't let her lies make you blind to real love when it comes. He looked at me with tears in his eyes, and for the first time since that terrible night, he nodded. It was small, but it was the beginning of hope. We started rebuilding life in small ways. I invited him to help me in the garden, where we planted fresh flowers to replace the ones Emily had once chosen. The act of planting something new felt symbolic, as though we were burying the past and allowing something better to grow. Sundays at church became another source of strength. People would clasp our hands, offer prayers, and remind us that forgiveness wasn't about excusing Emily's actions, but about freeing ourselves from carrying her poison in our hearts. Forgiveness was hard. I wrestled with it privately. Some nights I lay awake, replaying the moment I saw her slip the powder into my wine, the coldness in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. Anger would burn inside me, sharp and raw, but then I would remember, anger was just another chain tying me to her. If I wanted true peace, I had to let it go. So I began the slow, painful process of forgiveness. Not for her sake, for mine, for my son's, for the life we still had left to live. In time, laughter began to return to the house. It wasn't loud or carefree at first. It came in small bursts, like when my son accidentally overcooked dinner, and we both had to eat charred chicken, or when our neighbor's dog chased him down the street, and we couldn't stop laughing at the sight. These small moments reminded us that joy was still possible, even after betrayal. Healing wasn't about forgetting Emily. It was about not letting her define us anymore. She had written her own ending, but we still had chapters left to write, and slowly, piece by piece, we began writing them together. Months turned into a year, and the storm that Emily left behind slowly became a distant memory, like a scar, visible but no longer bleeding. Life had found its rhythm again, though forever changed. My son grew stronger. At first he feared love, afraid that every smile might hide a dagger, but over time he began to trust himself again. He learned to listen to his instincts, to value sincerity over charm. One evening he told me, "Dad, I think I'm ready to open my heart again, not because I've forgotten her, but because I've forgiven her." Those words were more powerful than anything I could have asked for. It wasn't just about moving on, it was about reclaiming his life. I too found a strange peace. In my evenings I'd sit on the porch with a glass of tea, staring at the setting sun. For so long I feared that betrayal would define my final years, but I realized now it didn't have to. Instead, I let it become a lesson, one I could pass down to my son and maybe someday to my grandchildren. The lesson was simple yet hard-earned. People will betray you. But betrayal does not end your story. It only tests your strength. One afternoon, while clearing the attic, my son found a box Emily had left behind. Inside were her journals, half-written plans and small notes that revealed the depth of her schemes. He looked at me, unsure whether to read them or burn them. After a long silence, I told him, "Let's burn them. Her story ends here, ours doesn't." We built a small fire in the backyard, and together we dropped the pages into the flames. The smoke curled upward, carrying her deceit away into the sky, leaving behind nothing but ash. As the fire crackled, my son placed a hand on my shoulder. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered. "It wasn't just for the fire, it was for everything. From that day forward, Emily's name was never spoken with bitterness again. She became nothing more than a shadow in our past, a reminder of what we had survived. Life slowly filled with new beginnings. My son started a new job, traveled for the first time in years, and even began speaking to someone who genuinely cared for him. I watched as light returned to his eyes, a light I once feared had been extinguished forever. As for me, I embraced the quiet joy of fatherhood in its purest form, not as a protector against betrayal, but as a witness to resilience. Every smile my son gave, every laugh we shared, felt like a victory over the darkness we once endured. Looking back, I realized that the story wasn't about Emily at all. It was about us, about how we refused to let her win, how we chose forgiveness over hatred, growth over bitterness, and love over fear. And so the chapter closed, not with revenge, not with bitterness, but with healing. The betrayal had tried to break us. Instead, it made us stronger. Sometimes the greatest justice isn't punishment. It's survival. It's rebuilding. It's proving that no matter what poison someone tries to pour into your life, you can rise above it. And we did. If this story moved you, don't just leave quietly. Your thoughts matter here. Share in the comments. What would you have done if you discovered such a betrayal? I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you felt the pain, the suspense, or the relief at the end, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss our next gripping story. Every week, we uncover tales that are filled with twists, heartbreak, and unexpected justice. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Your engagement keeps this community alive. It's more than just watching. It's about connecting, sharing, and healing together. So join us, be part of the family, and let's continue exploring stories that remind us all. Betrayal may break trust, but it never has to break us.